Welcome to the Medical Independent Innovation in Healthcare podcast series, where we explore the advances that are transforming Irish healthcare and the innovative minds behind them. From cutting-edge technologies to groundbreaking research to new models of care, Ireland is at the forefront of medical innovation. Our guests are leading figures in the Irish and international healthcare community who are revolutionising the way patients are being treated. So whether you're a healthcare professional, a patient, or simply curious about the latest developments in Irish medicine, join us for an engaging and informative discussion.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Innovation in Healthcare podcast series from the Medical Independent. I'm your host, Priscilla Lynch, Clinical Editor of the Medical Independent. Joining me in this episode is Professor Doug Veale, Consultant Rheumatologist at St Vincent's University Hospital Dublin and a Principal Investigator at the Conway Institute for Biomedical and Biomolecular Research at University College Dublin. Professor Veale has established an international reputation in translational research in the areas of early inflammatory arthritis and autoimmune diseases, and his interests focus on biopharmaceutical therapies, biomarkers of disease, and response therapy. Professor Veale, you've had many achievements and firsts over your long career to date, which we will come to shortly. But firstly, can you tell me what attracted you to medicine, and in particular rheumatology?
So thank you, Priscilla, for the invitation. I'm delighted to join you today. Bizarrely enough, and much to my parents' surprise, I decided that I wanted to be a doctor at the age of 10, and nothing was going to dissuade me thereafter. And it never occurred to me that I would actually have a career in anything other than medicine. But when I actually qualified in 1984 and I completed my basic training, I was at a sort of a crossroads and I didn't really know what specialty I wanted to actually go into. I knew I wanted to stay in hospital medicine. And I was fascinated actually because there was no rheumatologist in the hospital that I was working in. It was a teaching hospital in Dublin, and there was no rheumatologist. And actually, there was only 8 rheumatologists in the whole of Ireland at that time. So I saw a couple of patients who had been admitted under the care of a general physician. And at that time, of course, the treatments for patients with rheumatoid arthritis were pretty generic. It was either steroids or gold injections. And even methotrexate was not commonly being used at that time. And it was not actually that uncommon that patients not only suffered from their rheumatoid arthritis, but actually died as a consequence of either their disease or indeed complications of the treatment. And so I did develop a very early interest at this stage in rheumatology. And I went to speak to the 8 rheumatologists in Ireland at the time and asked their advice. And as you can imagine, I got very varying answers. Some said this is a great specialty and a great career. And some said, look, there won't be any jobs, so there's no point in actually going for it. And I think I was encouraged by this variety in the answers that I got. But eventually I decided to actually follow my heart, and I went into rheumatology. And after 1 year of training in a clinical job, I actually embarked on an MD, and I spent 3 years doing an MD through University College Dublin, and that was really looking at psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis, and we were trying to look at what were the similarities in the pathology on the and the histology of skin and the joint tissues in patients with psoriasis and those with psoriatic arthritis. And this really hadn't been done before. And so it was relatively groundbreaking, and we actually identified some specific similarities between the pathology in psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis and published that actually in the Annals of Rheumatic Disease and Rheumatology and other very good, peer-reviewed rheumatology journals at that time. And then my career took a turn at that stage. I completed my MD studies in Dublin, which was, again, a little unusual in that a lot of my colleagues who would have specialized, they would have actually left Ireland to continue their studies abroad before undertaking a higher degree. So I had completed my MD, and then I was looking around for a job in the UK or in America, and my path then took me to Scotland, to Dundee, which was actually a very good medical and scientific centre at the time. And I was lucky enough to get a job as a lecturer, as an academic lecturer in medicine, which gave me the opportunity to both continue my clinical training, but also to actually continue my academic studies. And I worked with Professor Jill Belch, who was a great supporter and a great facilitator, a mentor. And Jill encouraged me to continue my research. And that very much was in the area of vascular medicine. So that increased my interest really in connective tissue diseases like lupus and systemic sclerosis, but also in general medical diseases, including diabetics, patients with kidney failure who had complications that affected their peripheral circulation. And we actually ran a vascular service along with the vascular surgeons in Dundee for 3.5 years while I was there, in addition to continuing my training in rheumatology. And that's where I completed my CCST essentially in rheumatology, but also in general medicine. And I was very lucky at that stage. Again, my career came to a choice in paths with two options, really, whether to go to the States and do a further fellowship. And at that time, then I was lucky to meet Paul Emery, who's just had been appointed as the professor of rheumatology in Leeds. And Leeds was the first flagship department of the Arthritis Research Council in the UK, way back when Werner Wright was one of the first, if you like, leaders in academic rheumatology in the UK. So Paul was setting up a new department, and he encouraged me to apply for a post as a senior lecturer, and that took me to Leeds then at a very interesting time, because that was in 1995, and Paul was essentially, he had a background really in clinical trials in rheumatic diseases, and he'd done a lot of pivotal trials in the development of a lot of new drugs. And at that stage, we were beginning to use methotrexate and sulfasalazine as first-line disease-modifying drugs in rheumatology. But the idea of the magic bullet, the treatment, one treatment which could significantly improve the life of patients with rheumatic diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis or psoriatic arthritis, was still really it was unheard of at that stage. And I remember, just going back to my time in Ireland as a research fellow, I had written an article about the desire to identify a magic bullet, this new treatment that we could say, could induce a remission in patients with no side effects, but with the best outcomes for the patients. And at that stage, it was a dream, really. But when I got to Leeds, then it was really around that time that the idea of monoclonal antibodies had been introduced into scientific research and started becoming a reality in medical research. And so we were there starting up this clinical trials unit in Leeds with a fantastic team, a great new team, vibrant young people working in rheumatology. There was a new professor, new lecturers, and a very big team as well. And the whole concept of the unit in Leeds was to treat patients early with drugs that could make a difference. And one of our first papers actually that came out of the Leeds Early Arthritis Project was combination therapy with methotrexate and sulfasalazine and steroids. So we were using the old conventional treatments, but instead of using one at a time and adding them in one after the other, or using them in series, we did this study, completed the study to actually combine these treatments in one to treat patients as what we thought at the time as optimally. But it very, very soon became apparent that the monoclonal antibodies were a real possibility for improving the life of patients with rheumatic diseases. And of course, the first monoclonal antibody were the anti-TNFs or anti-tumor necrosis factor drugs. And we were lucky to be involved with the Kennedy Institute in London in some of the pivotal trials in the TNF inhibitors. And of course, the first TNF inhibitor was given by intravenous infusion, and that was a drug called infliximab. And then very shortly after that, newer drugs that could be given by subcutaneous injection came along. And that was a fusion protein called etanercept, and then the first humanized monoclonal antibody, which was actually called adalimumab. And they were the first three anti-TNFs that really became available. And during my time in Leeds, we started to use these in patients, and we realized very quickly that they made a significant difference to the patients. They improved their quality of life very quickly because they treated the pain and the symptoms of the rheumatic diseases, but they also improved the function of patients. And this was the first time really that drugs made a significant difference in function. And it was only subsequently, as clinical trials progressed, that we realized that these drugs actually inhibited the damage associated with these diseases and that they prevented the erosions to bone and to cartilage, which has made such an improvement by actually preventing damage and therefore maintaining function in patients with rheumatoid and psoriatic arthritis. And we did look at other monoclonal antibodies in clinical trials, including anti-CD4 monoclonal antibodies, and also the monoclonal antibody that came out of Cambridge, which Cambridge Antibody Technologies, which was called Campath 1. And that had been used to treat leukemias and lymphomas very successfully. But it seemed to be a little bit more toxic. It had some more side effects than the anti-TNFs. So the anti-TNFs really became the number one monoclonal antibody. And they were the first, if you like, magic bullet that we had envisaged those years previously. And so I stayed in Leeds for about 6 years, and we were working there to build up the unit. And it became, I think it's fair to say, probably one of the most prestigious clinical trials units in Europe. And it also gave me the opportunity to meet and to work with colleagues who were also working at prestigious units in Holland, right across Europe, Vienna, Erlangen in Germany, and also colleagues further afield. So colleagues in Australia, Malaysia, and the USA. And really, we built up a very large network of collaboration with other rheumatologists right across the globe. And this, of course, enhanced our capability to undertake global trials, clinical trials, but also to grow and develop our own research interests outside of clinical trials, which is really focused on trying to understand the mechanisms of disease. And it was really looking at the mechanisms of disease, looking at the molecular pathology of diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis, that we started to understand how specific molecules could be targeted with monoclonal antibodies or with small molecular inhibitors. And so this was actually how these new treatments actually developed, by identifying a single molecule that could be targeted rather than giving a drug that affected every molecule or every cell in the body. So this was really the beginning of what we now call precision medicine, where we're targeting a specific molecule to identify a response in a specific disease. And as you know, over the last 20 years, there's been a huge advance in all diseases, not just rheumatology or rheumatic diseases, in the use of drugs that target specific molecules now, which have changed the lives of so many patients. And when I say, I should recognize the role of our many patients who have, they've traveled this journey with me and with all of my collaborators, because without our patients involved in the studies that we've undertaken and the clinical trials that we've completed, the development of these drugs would never have happened. And so it's really a tribute to our patients who have actually engaged in research. And this is one of the things that I've tried to do over the last 20 years since coming back to Ireland, is really to involve patients in our research, not just undertaking research studies, but giving them a voice. So you may know that there's the Patient Voice initiative, which is really about involving patients in the design and the development of clinical trial protocols and research protocols. And this has really become a major advance now, where patients have a seat at the table as a stakeholder in the development of the design and also the if you like, the writing and submission of research protocols. And it's making a huge difference because, of course, they have first-hand experience of these diseases. I'm also very lucky to have worked very closely with some brilliant scientists, without whom the molecular work that we've done really, would never have been possible. And I would, make particular mention of Professor Ursula Fearon, who I've collaborated with over the last 26 years. And we returned from Leeds in 2001 to Dublin, and I was appointed in St. Vincent's Hospital at that time. And we continued our research in St. Vincent's and UCD for about 7 years. And then at that time, UCD actually appointed me as the first director of translational research. And what that did for me was it gave me protected time. So essentially, my clinical job became half-time, and I got protected time for 50% of my time to undertake the research and also to act as a leader to help others undertake translational research in St. Vincent's and in the Conway Institute in UCD. And so we continued that work, and then Professor Fearon was appointed as the chair of molecular rheumatology in Trinity College, which is based in the Trinity Biomedical Sciences Institute. And it was really around that time that we first applied for the Centre of Excellence Award from EULAR. And EULAR is the umbrella organization for rheumatology associations across Europe. And what they do is they recognize the work that you've done, the publications that you've actually published in peer-reviewed journals, and also the amount of research funding that you've obtained over the previous 5 years. And if that reaches a certain level of merit, then they award the Centre of Excellence Award. And it was the first time that that had been awarded to a centre in Ireland. So we were very proud of that. And the Taoiseach at the time unveiled our award in a ceremony in UCD. And we were delighted to announce that award. And we became one of 25 centres in Europe, across Europe, where research excellence was recognised by our peers in the EULAR group. And we've subsequently renewed that for a further 5 years. So in 2019, we were able to extend that award for a further 5 years based on the research that we had achieved between 2014 and 2019. So it's a recognition of our achievements in terms of research and the publications, of our group. And when I talk about our group, that has grown over the years as well. So since 2014, Professor Fearon's group now has grown to maybe 16 or 17 researchers in the lab in Trinity College. And we've had numerous fellows, clinical fellows, working with me and the team in St. Vincent's Hospital as well. And so we've had a great team of clinical fellows, scientists. We've also got great research nurses who obviously are critically important within the Clinical Research Centre in St. Vincent's and in the Mater, actually. And we've started clinics really across the two centres in Dublin. And with the help of our patients, our nurses, the doctors, scientists, our physiotherapists are involved, our occupational therapists are involved, and our patients. We've really built up this collaborative team, which works extremely well. And I shouldn't forget the site in Harold's Cross, where we also have some research nurses and the advanced nurse practitioners. And many of our patients from Harold's Cross are also engaged in the research that we have undertaken. And this teamwork has been particularly satisfying to me. I think it's why I've achieved some of the things that I have achieved. I've managed to continue an academic career from the time I started in Vincent's and UCD doing my MD, through my time in Dundee, the 6 years I spent in Leeds as a senior lecturer, and then coming back to Dublin to the job in St. Vincent's, which ultimately led to my professorship in UCD and all the publications and research outputs that we've had. Now, aside from that, we've achieved a great deal in terms of our clinical practice, and research in terms of publications and papers and getting the funding in is all very well, but it's really translating that into an effect which would change the outcome of patients. And I've mentioned how the drugs and the development of new drugs in particular have changed the outcomes for patients over the years. But really, the other things that we've changed, I think, are how we develop and deliver our services. And the first clinical change that we instituted really was the early arthritis clinics. So we started seeing patients within 6 weeks of the onset of their symptoms. And that remains one of our key clinical aims in the early arthritis clinics in St. Vincent's and in the Mater Hospital. The other development that we've actually been able to do is identify patients actually before they develop arthritis. And this is pretty unique and fairly recent as well. So we've identified markers or biomarkers in subjects that we can measure in their blood, but also in biopsies of their joints, which show some patients who will subsequently develop rheumatoid arthritis, but before they've actually developed the signs and symptoms of arthritis. And the beauty of that research and the aim of that research is very much so to target prevention, cure essentially. Can we prevent arthritis in those individuals who have a susceptibility to the disease? And I think that's really the first momentous step towards developing a cure. Because if we can treat and treat to prevent the onset of disease, then we can potentially cure the arthritis as well. And not just arthritis, but all autoimmune diseases, I think such as lupus and systemic sclerosis as well. So that's a major advance, I think, that is at a very early stage, but is enormously innovative. The other area which we identified probably about 7 or 8 years ago now, and I would attribute the initiation of this work to one of our ANPs in Harold's Cross, and that's Louise Moore, who started with an interest in treating women who were either wanting to start a family or who were already pregnant and embarking on the pregnancy journey, who had a rheumatic disease. And Louise identified really a major gap in the services in Ireland. And what Louise did was she undertook a survey of patients who were going through this journey at the family planning and pregnancy stages. But she also undertook a survey of rheumatologists across Ireland. And what she found was that patients were getting a variety of different informations from different sources. There was no continuity or no conformity in the information that was being given to patients. But also, she identified that rheumatologists really had no go to colleagues in the obstetrics world who they could actually liaise with specifically for patients who they were looking after who were pregnant with a rheumatic disease. And so this led to the foundation of the Rose Clinic, which is the rheumatology obstetric service, which we established in the National Hospital, the National Maternity Hospital in Holles Street with Professor Fionnuala McAuliffe. And that's been up and running now since, I think, about 2017. And it's the first combined clinic that we actually undertake on a monthly basis in Holles Street Hospital, where myself and Louise and one of the rheumatology registrars attend the obstetric clinic. And we see specifically those patients who are either planning a pregnancy or who are already pregnant who have rheumatic diseases. And we've taken referrals into that clinic from all over Ireland. And so it really is a national service. And we've just actually finished the publication of the national guidelines for rheumatology obstetric care. So I'm particularly proud of that work that we've done with Louise and Professor McAuliffe, because that service has really led the way. And actually, it's not only the first in Ireland, but it actually was one of the first in the UK and probably one of the first across Europe as well. So I think that the research that we've done, while it covers the molecular and the cellular aspects of rheumatic diseases, it also covers treatments and novel treatments and innovation in novel treatments, including particularly, I guess, the biotherapeutics, such as the monoclonal antibodies that have been so successful. But also, I think it highlights how we've used the information that we've gained from those studies and translated them into care in everyday services for our patients. And I just know from my own personal experience and feedback from our patients that these changes in the services have made a huge difference to these patients' lives. And testimonials from our patients have been very heartwarming and incredibly, I think, encouraging to all those working in this area to continue the work that we're doing so that eventually we may be able to eradicate rheumatic diseases and autoimmune diseases more generally.
Professor Veale, that was an absolutely fascinating journey through your career, both from a clinical and a research perspective. And you really showcased how rheumatology was a specialty that was absolutely ripe for innovation, and your career pathway has mirrored that. And you've been very much at the forefront, both at the academic side about improving disease understanding and making sure that patients had access to these treatments by implementing clinical trial infrastructure and getting patients on those trials, and then further refining that so that they could have better outcomes. And I think it's very easy to sit here in 2023 and forget about how disabled patients were in the 70s and the 80s when you came into medical practice in rheumatology. I mean, the degree of disability and pain, and now to a disease that can be not necessarily easily managed, but very successfully managed and at an early stage. And now that we're actually looking at a case of where we're going to try and prevent people even developing these diseases in the first place. So I think it is a magnificent, really, journey in medicine. We look at all the different specialties in this series, but rheumatology is fascinating. And I think it's kind of underestimated as well what's really happened in the last 20 years for outcomes for patients and how fascinating that is. And
Yes.
also really showcased today the role of collaboration, whether it's with national and international colleagues, and also a multidisciplinary approach and involving patients.
I suppose I didn't focus too much, but actually, when I started in rheumatology, which was 1989, I think, um, you know, I'd say 50% of our patients attending the clinics were actually in either in wheelchairs or were only able to walk with a crutch or a walking stick. So the level of disability at that stage was absolutely enormous. And in fact, what people didn't realize was that rheumatoid arthritis, which was thought to be a disease of the joints, actually was associated with a higher mortality, uh, up to 10 years earlier than those in the general population. And that was actually comparable to patients who were being diagnosed with cancer. So it was really when that sort of those figures were highlighted that we really only, I think, became aware on a global scale the level of disability and the level of mortality associated with the rheumatic diseases. And when you look at the data now in this, you know, era post monoclonal antibody therapy, and with the introduction of the small molecular inhibitors, there's been a huge reduction in the number of surgeries for joint replacement in patients with rheumatic diseases. And there is a huge increase in the level of participation that patients actually can experience in the workplace, in their family life, and in their activities. So I see patients now who continue to play senior county football or hurling, championship jockeys who continue to ride, uh, they're grade one winners, and triathletes, elite triathletes, of all grades, people who are participating in every aspect of their lives and their families' lives because of the innovation of these new treatments and the delivery of care for our patients over the last 20 odd years.
And speaking of which, as if you haven't been busy enough on the clinical side and the research side, you've also been very actively involved with patient organisations, in particular Arthritis Ireland, in providing support and awareness of the diseases for the patients that they deal with. And I know recently you were granted a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Irish Society of Rheumatology, and that was one of the many, many achievements that were outlined during the meeting. That your deep relationship with Arthritis Ireland and with your patients. It has been an amazing journey. So, what were your thoughts really on being granted that award?
Oh, I was overcome, as you can imagine. It was very unexpected, and I have to, I have to, say that my colleagues were incredibly generous in giving me that award and recognizing, I think, some of the achievements. And as I've sort of tried to highlight here, that I would never have achieved any of these things if it wasn't for all those other people who were there with me, standing beside me and helping me and supporting me. And actually, I have a great deal to be thankful to Arthritis Ireland for as well, because they've supported us much more than we've supported them over the last 20 years in reality. But it's been a great collaboration, and I really have to hand it to all the staff and the volunteers in Arthritis Ireland, who I've come to know very well over the last 20 years. Because, at one stage, Arthritis Ireland, which was it went by a form. It was formerly went by another name, and it was sort of reinvented as Arthritis Ireland in the early noughties. And they've really developed a fantastic organization which provides support for the patients, but it also includes patients in the running of the organization and in giving them if you like, a seat, a stakeholder seat at the table to decide how the organization progresses and develops. And I think that's, again, very, very important. And I would just say Gráinne O'Leary, at the CEO, and her team at Arthritis Ireland have done an amazing job, and they've been incredibly supportive to us over the years. So I recognise their input into our achievements as well. But the other night when I got my Lifetime Achievement Award from the ISR was a truly moving and very emotional experience for me. And I was very honoured and privileged to receive that award, I have to say.
Congratulations again. And there was quite a list of achievements, actually, which we haven't had time to go through in this episode, all of them. But I was also struck that you were the chief medical officer for a couple of startups as well. So that really highlighted to me that you weren't afraid just to sit there in the lab and look at, the disease and try and improve understanding. You've reached out to both clinical practice, to research, to clinical trials, and also to industry as well. So that innovation takes many forms, and you don't just have to sit there in one area. And even working with Arthritis Ireland, you have some very innovative patient treatment programs as well. So would that be something you would encourage clinicians to do as well? Just maybe look out the window of the lab, and there's lots of elements involved in innovation.
Well, I always, people over the years, people have said to me, particularly a lot of my clinical colleagues, they'd sort of say, "Oh, it's all very well doing research, but what are you doing? You should be in the clinics just treating patients." But without research, we wouldn't have the treatments of tomorrow. We wouldn't have the services of tomorrow. And actually, what I often say is that research is just another term for curiosity. And curiosity is asking the questions. So if we accept the status quo of where we're at today, then we'll never ask the questions, where do we want to be tomorrow? So if you're curious about what you want to do tomorrow and next year and the year after in terms of how you want to improve services for patients and improve treatments, then you've got to ask the question, how are we going to do that? And what do I not know? I know what I know, but what don't I know? And so many of us concentrate a little bit on what we do know. But we sort of tend to sometimes maybe be frightened of asking what I don't know. And I think as a doctor, I think it's absolutely critical, both on a clinical level, but also in a research context, to ask the question, what I don't know. If you don't appreciate what you don't know in a clinical situation, then it's very easy to make a mistake, and that mistake could have real consequences for a patient in real time. So I think I always say this to my students and to my fellows: you have to be honest to admit what you don't know. And if you don't admit to yourself what you don't know, then you'll never correct that. You'll never actually look for the answer and try and actually understand where there is a gap in your knowledge. And so research, as far as I'm concerned, is having a curious mind, keeping an open mind, not accepting the status quo as being the only way to do things. And I think research, to be done correctly and scientifically, there's a process to go through. But you can ask those questions and hopefully get some answers which are both valid but also robust, so that they can actually change the future and improve the way that we provide care for our patients and the treatments that we actually provide for our patients.
I think that's very wise advice, and that's all we have time for. So that is a wrap. So thank you very much, Professor Veale, for joining us for this episode of the Innovation in Healthcare podcast series from the Medical Independent. Stay tuned for further episodes.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe to the Medical Independent for the latest healthcare news and debate. Sign up at www.mindo.ie to stay up to date on all the latest medical news. Join the discussion on Twitter at med_Indo News. Introducing the new Medical Independent app. Why not join over 14,000 healthcare professionals and stay up to date on the latest healthcare news in Ireland? Read in-depth reports on the issues impacting the health service and medical professionals. Trusted insights, breaking news alerts, in-depth analysis and more. Download the Medical Independent app on the Apple Store or the Google Play Store by searching the word Mindo. The Medical Independent app. Your news, your way.